Okay, hi Dom, how are you doing today?
Hi, Marie, I'm great.
Good, I'm so glad you came by today and you're going to talk to us about a little bit about your background, who you are, where you came from, and how you got into housing, and a little bit about the legal education that you're getting and your schooling and that kind of thing, and some of your great ideas we talked about a week ago. So I'm very excited to hear what you've got to say. So whenever you're ready, we can get started.
Yeah, so you already said my name. I'm Dom Belcastro. I'm from San Diego originally. I moved to Portland about 6 years ago, and I've lived all over different parts of Portland. First started out North Portland, then moved out to Southeast, and I've lived in different parts of Southeast ever since then. And I got interested in housing in Portland after I was no-cause evicted back in 2013. And I was a new renter. I'd only been renting in Portland for about a year and a half, 2 years at most. And I had no idea that no-cause eviction was even legal. And everyone in my house was surprised because we were all young people who had only been renting for a little bit of time. And I didn't immediately get connected to community groups after that point, but through my education and a little reflection and talking to other people who have been dealing with housing issues over the years, I got into the Renters' Rights Hotline at Community Alliance Tenants, and then from there became involved with Portland Tenants United, organizing tenants and writing social media posts and organizing with some really smart people and talking about a lot of great ideas that tenants have, but don't have the power to enact them. So that's the work, is to get that ball rolling and building the power. But what I've been focusing on a lot recently is Eviction Court. And my interest in that really originally started by reading the book Evicted by Matthew Desmond.
Oh yeah.
And then getting involved with eviction support in Multnomah County Eviction Court. And after meeting a few people who had been served for-cause evictions, which are different than no-cause in that you can remedy whatever the situation is in most cases. And as data come out recently, most evictions are because of late rent payments or partial rent payments. And again, Matthew Desmond released data that showed the average missed payment is $300 or a little bit more. And that has a lot of ramifications in a person's life. You know, that little bit of money they miss ends up costing them a lot more going through the eviction process. So I'm also a student at PCC. I'm working on my paralegal degree, and I hope to one day work in a law office that defends tenants in eviction court and also in other tenants' rights issues. But the project that I've been trying to speak about with as many people as possible, learn more ideas on what people are doing, and the projects that are already happening in this city, has to do with eviction court support, eviction defenses. Because there was a study or a task force put together by the Oregon State Bar that did some research and showed that over 95% of tenants go to eviction court and have to be represented pro se, which means by themselves. They don't have an attorney or anyone to help them in their eviction process. But on the flip side, landlords in over 95% of cases are represented by either an attorney or a non-lawyer, which tend to be their property manager or some other agent that they hire, which statutorily they have the right to do in Oregon. And this law was created in the 70s when the preemption to rent control was also put in place. So there was a very anti-tenant, pro-landlord legislature that created this law that basically ensures that a landlord will be represented in court, but on the flip side, tenants tend to not be represented in court. So my hope is that as more people talk to others who have been evicted, as more people witness the process of eviction in eviction court, because it's open to the public. Anybody can go down to Multnomah County Court. There's a specific courtroom that does evictions every day at 9 a.m. And anybody can go in, watch what happens. If they feel so inclined, they can talk to people who are being evicted and, see why they're there. And in cases like myself, who has a little bit more education and preparation to, understand what is going on in eviction court, my hope is that the community will be able to support these people who are put through eviction court, because a lot of us renters aren't, and we have no idea what that can feel like, what that can look like, and what the process can be.
Now, you had a really good idea the other week when we were down at the coffee shop, right, about a new process that you're trying to get started. Did I understand you correctly?
Yeah. So this idea I have is would be a community-led effort where people who feel comfortable would meet with tenants who are being evicted. And these records are public. The case log, or there's like a list of people being evicted, the landlords and who they're represented by, that are in the court, but also I believe there's a database online where you can look at these cases that are coming up in court in the coming weeks, because eviction court is one of the quickest civil processes. It usually gets so after a first appearance to the resolution is just a few weeks, which in the court system is very rare. Most other civil procedures, criminal cases take months. But eviction court, you could be served an eviction, appear, and either have the case dismissed or be out of your home in a matter of 4 weeks or less. So the idea that I have is to get community members from churches, from social interest groups, from tenants' rights organizations, from general housing organizations to turn out their membership, their volunteers to eviction court, first to witness it, to understand what this process means in these people's lives. But then, like I said, those who feel comfortable and who are prepared to speak with these tenants and help them through their negotiations. Because while there's this statutory right for landlords to hire non-lawyers, tenants don't have that right to be represented by a non-lawyer in eviction court. But there's nothing stopping a concerned member of the community from being, a third-party support in these negotiations. Because the way it works in eviction court, there's roll call about 5 or 10 minutes after the judge comes in and gives their introduction to the room and explains very briefly what eviction court in the process is for most people and what it will look like. And then after that introduction and the roll is taken, which is another interesting part, many tenants don't show up to their eviction date, and that can have some really negative effects on their housing situations long term, because even if this tenant has been served an eviction notice and they move out before the day that they have their court date, that eviction is on their record for years. And it can be a really easy way to be denied housing and denied better housing, objectively, because the way that the screening process works, landlords have a lot of leeway in denying tenants housing if they have an eviction judgment against them. That's not even diving into the fact that just having an eviction served can also be a really bad mark on your record. Even if the eviction was later dismissed, the fact that it was filed against the tenant can cause a landlord to reject their housing. application. So when a tenant comes to court, they say, "I'm here." When the judge calls their name, the other side, landlords almost always show up to eviction court. So it's not very often when a tenant is served a summary judgment, which means an automatic win because the other party didn't show up. But on the flip side, a lot of tenants don't show up, so they lose their cases automatically because they might not understand that they need to go to eviction court even though they've left their apartment, or they might have even talked with their property management and come to some agreement, but then still didn't know that they have to show up to court to say we came to an agreement. And that can be a really quick and easy way for a landlord to evict somebody that they see as a problem, and might have done something mundane like paying a few days late. They can reject that payment, serve the eviction, get them kicked out. So what's been proven though too, and it showed in this futures task force that the Oregon State Bar put out, is if a tenant has any sort of legal representation, first off, they have much better outcomes. But if they just have some sort of education on the eviction process, they have better outcomes because they know not to sign stipulated agreements, which are just a legal word for an agreement with landlord to pay back rent, for example, or to pay late fees, or if it's a lease violation, for example, smoking in a room, to not smoke again. And it could be as easy as that, is you just tell the attorney that's representing the landlord, I know I messed up, but I'm not going to smoke in the room again. And then they get to stay in their home. Some tenants think that they get this eviction notice for that, and they have no recourse, and they're just out of their home without a fight.
So what role would tenant advocates have in this process that you're thinking about?
The way that it's worked in the past when I've done it is I come, I meet this tenant, I talk about their situation, I try to understand where they are and try to help them understand more on what their rights are and what the best outcome for the day would be. And then so then we talk over a plan for when the negotiation starts with the representative on the landlord side. And again, I'm more of a watchdog. I'm not there to speak for the tenant. Mm-hmm. I'm there, to answer questions whenever they think they hear something fishy. I'm there to read over the agreement after it's been written out by the landlord. And you can always ask for time after a stipulated agreement is presented to the tenant. You don't just have to say yes or no on the dot. You can take it, into a private area, look it over, read it over, like really, with a fine tooth comb. Yeah, just comb through it. Like, is this going to be something that I can fulfill? Is this going to work for me? Is this going to be just a trap to get me kicked out of my home? Are these not points that I can actually uphold? And then you go back and the tenant tells them, what they can do and what they can't do, or what they want changed.
And so when they go back into the courtroom, what's been finalized out in the hall? Is it all settled out there, and then they go back in, the judge rubber stamps it, or what?
Essentially, yeah, you described how it works. So the negotiation happens in the hall. The tenant either agrees to the stipulated agreement that they've discussed and says, I can do this, let's go take it to the judge and tell them that this is what we worked out. Or the tenant, if they feel like they were evicted wrongly, or that they have a good case to fight the eviction, say it's a discriminatory eviction or an eviction that was done in error. For example, I've gone with somebody who paid their rent, on the second day after it was due. And the 72-hour notice was served the day after, and they rejected her payment. And this is an affordable housing provider that rejected the payment. So it was very strange situation and not one that should have gone to court. So if she felt that she really wanted to fight that, then the step isn't sign the civil agreement. The step is go upstairs, file for trial, and then the week after, because eviction court proceedings are really quick, you go to court the next week. And at that point, it would definitely, the tenant would best be served by getting an attorney, which still is difficult for a lot of people, just because of the cost and because there aren't enough landlord or tenant attorneys to go around in Portland. But yeah, that's the alternative. If there's not an agreement that's signed by both parties that's presented to the judge, then they go and file for a trial.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. So should we have like paralegal representatives or something, a step up from that? Maybe they're not attorneys, so they don't have to pay them, the big bucks, hundreds of dollars per hour. But since tenants aren't being represented, and then the as you're describing, the tenant supporter can't speak for them. And it sounds very complex, really. I mean, you have to know how to read those papers and that kind of thing. So should we be opting for or pursuing some ladder up as a legal representative that could do the court cases for tenants that don't have the money to hire a lawyer? Should we be? Is that something we should pursue?
I definitely believe that we should be fighting for the same right that landlords have, which is a cheaper alternative to legal representation, to lawyer representation. And in that same futures task force that was put out by the Oregon State Bar, they did research into what's called the triple LT license, the limited license legal technician, which exists in Washington. It's a non-lawyer who has a credential. In Washington, it's only for family law proceedings. But in Oregon, the bar figured out that there's need for family law non-lawyers because a lot of people go through family court without any representation. But there's a much larger need in eviction court. And the research was done over a few different states. They looked at New York City, for example, in New York State, and their pilot project for universal eviction court representation. Now in New York City, it's attorneys and then VolunteerSupport that do the representation. And they're in their first year, so there's still some data to collect, some kinks to work out, see what's working, what's not. But Oregon has said that we're going to have this triple LT program. It's just a matter of creating the framework, getting it approved by the Oregon Supreme Court, and then having a bill in the legislature that changes the laws to make it legal for a non-lawyer to represent somebody in eviction court.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, it is. And it's something that we need to still fight for because it's not around the corner. The way that it's being talked about in these legal circles, and in my experience, because I do have a little bit of a window into that with my school and the faculty that I work with, the bar is a little sluggish on getting this going. And there still is the question of, does the legislature have the will, the political will, to support this, not just create the framework to allow it, but to actually make it powerful and impactful across the state. And this is going to require an investment by the state and different cities and the counties to make sure that we are actually getting more money to train people to be effective representatives and to be educated enough to represent people in eviction court. And so I don't think that my idea needs to wait until this process is complete, I think we need to have some movement now. We need to have education, continuing education of people who are in the eviction court, but also others who are, interested in tenants' rights issues in general and who want to get involved, so that when it does get further down the line and we're closer to having the rules in place, having a bill brought forth, we'll have a grassroots support. We'll have political will to make this a fully funded and community supported program. Because the way it's being discussed now is the person trying to get a limited license legal foundation credential, they would need to have experience working in an office, a law office that practices primarily landlord-tenant law. And in Portland, which the most populous city in Oregon, it's got the most lawyers in the state. There are very few landlord-tenant lawyers who represent tenants exclusively. Now, there are a lot of attorneys who represent landlords exclusively, and then there's some that do a little bit of both. But we've really only got a few private attorneys and then the Legal Aid Services of Oregon that represent tenants. So we've got to we've got to be supporting the people who are in eviction court today, and turning out and saying that we're not forgetting about you, like we see you and you deserve to stay in your homes. But we also need to be, pushing our electeds, pushing for financial support to set up the groundwork that would make this program a success.
So we need training, so the schools would be involved,
Yes.
Then the financing of it from the city and state would be involved,
Yeah.
and the public acceptance of it and tenant sanction.
Right. In my mind, in a perfect world, we would have an apprenticeship type program where there would be a few landlord-tenant attorneys that oversee this, and they're the ones really getting these LLT workers up to snuff. And they would definitely need a lot of cooperation with Portland Community College, because they're the only ABA approved paralegal school. But currently they don't offer a landlord-tenant law class. So I've gone through this program. I'm about to graduate, but I've never taken a landlord-tenant law class. I've had to do all of my own education on my own, seeking out people to teach me, seeking out resources, and just reading the laws myself, reading different case law and as it goes. So we've got to start shifting our priority a little bit. We've got to we can't just say this program is needed and eventually it'll happen. We got to start fighting for it now and start moving to the point where we'll be ready for it, where there will be enough law offices that enough law offices with landlord-tenant attorneys to educate the people that will become these low-cost tenant representatives. Because right now, landlord-tenant attorneys that represent tenants are overworked and underpaid. So it's a double whammy. But just like we have universal representation for criminal court, and that's been in the U.S. for a long time, we need to have that same emphasis in the civil procedure of eviction court.
All right. Well, these are great ideas, and I think I'm excited to hear about it, and I know other people will be. So, and this is not the last that we're going to hear from you on this,
Nope.
right? So you're going to keep us posted and everything.
Yeah, you'll
And
see Eviction Court.
as you were talking, I was just envisioning you having your own school, right? And getting buku bucks from the state, right, to train everybody, right? And even old people like me applying for training, right, to represent. So I think it's an excellent idea, and it's more good ideas that like this that people need to hear about. So thank you very much for sharing. All right.